This is Professor Gavoor. Welcome to SBNM 5212 Microeconomics for Managers. And we're using a book called Managerial Economics, Economic Tools for Today's Decision Makers. Of course, we're using a 6th edition, which I think is a 2009 edition. But that's okay, the price is right. A good economic choice by all of us. The overview of this chapter is economics and managerial decision making, economics of a business, and review of economic terms. The learning objectives, which I really tend to slough over all the time, is we want to define what managerial economics is, cite the important types of resource allocation decisions, illustrate how economic changes affect a firm's ability to earn an acceptable return, and apply to an individual firm the 3 basic questions faced by a country, of all things. Economics is the study of behavior of human beings in producing, distributing, consuming material goods and services in a world of scarce resources. Scarcity is a huge concept in microeconomics. Management is the science of organizing and allocating a firm's scarce resources to achieve its desired objectives. The desired objectives of for-profit firms are to earn a profit. The desired objectives for nonprofit firms are also to not operate at a loss, because they will eventually go out of business if they keep doing that. Managerial economics is the use of economic analysis, the economic mindset and way of looking at things, to make business decisions involving the best use, the best allocation of an organization's scarce resources. An alternative name for microeconomics is called price theory, and oftentimes organizations will deliberate and worry greatly about what price they charge for their products or services. Economics used to be the basic course of study for business, and probably then they weren't even calling it business, they were calling it commerce. Even at North Park University, one of the first courses of study that they had when they opened their doors as a high school or a junior college, I believe, was commerce, amongst all things. So for all students intending to manage or run businesses, they usually would major in economics. I believe Harvard doesn't have an undergraduate a business degree, and people that are interested in going into business or commerce study economics there. And that was the case at many liberal arts colleges. The study of business per se, separate from the social science of economics, is more recent. Managerial economics and other disciplines. Well, marketing is involved in demand and price elasticity, which is something we're going to talk about. So marketing is trying to create demand for products and services and trying to decide when and where they can take price increases and when they can't. Managerial accounting is talking about relevant cost, and the terms of managerial economics that apply to managerial accounting are relevant costs, break-even analysis, incremental cost analysis, opportunity costs. When we talk about strategy, it's a type of competition. What kind of firm do you have? What kind of industry class does it operate in? Is it a perfectly competitive marketplace? Is it a monopoly? Is it an oligopoly or a monopolistic competitive market? So structure, conduct, and performance analysis. Management science and managerial economics go hand in hand because we're talking about linear programming, regression analysis, forecasting, all things we covered in 5411, which is quantitative methods for managers. And then finance, capital budgeting, break-even analysis, opportunity cost, economic value added. So this idea is more of a way to thinking. And in fact, I think it was Keynes who talked about economics not so much as a discipline of science or social science or even mathematics, but teaching people how to think economically. So the relationship to other business disciplines, we've talked about this. We talked about it in that graphic. So basic questions. What are the economic conditions in a particular market? Should our firm be in the business at all? What business should we be in? If yes, at what price and output levels to maximize our economic profit or minimize our short-term losses? How can we organize and invest our resources, land, labor, capital, management skills to maintain a competitive advantage over other firms that are in the business? And what are the risks involved? These are all questions that managers must ask themselves all the time, and it involves the microeconomics of the marketplace. Certainly macroeconomics, as you may have studied if you took 5411, was the study of national and international economics. How do the study of currencies, national currencies, and how governments control them, and how governments allocate and manage their cash and make business incentives by how much cash is available for investment and lending out to individual entrepreneurial firms or individuals. And microeconomics is the study of economics at the level of a firm and individual households. So macro, big scale, micro, small scale. Risks. Changes in demand and supply conditions. Talk about risks. As I'm recording this, the COVID-19 crisis of 2020 is taking place, and the change in demand and supply are dramatic and almost immediate. Within 1 or 2 weeks, we've seen paper goods, the demand increase dramatically and almost unpredictably and almost mind-bogglingly not being an actual word. The supply is changing as well. What if you're in a movie business? What's the demand and supply for movie theaters? What is the demand and supply for restaurants when the state governments are closing them for on-site dining and only allowing them to be open for delivery or carry-out? What are the technological changes and effects of competition? One example we'll use later is Kodak. Technology changed. They were a company that made a lot of money on film and film processing into photos, physical photos, and then digital imaging came along and they were not able to adapt very well. Changes in interest and inflation rates as we speak right now because of COVID. The interest rates, the prime interest rate in the United States is essentially zero. Exchange rates for firms engaged in international trade. If the dollar is strong, it has a lot of buying power, but it makes your products more expensive for export. And political risk for companies with foreign operations. Well, again, this virus thing is making a lot of companies think and rethink that if they have large business ventures in Korea and Italy right now. So let's look at the economics of a business, because microeconomics, remember, is the study of economics at the level of a firm and individual households. So questions that managers must answer. What are the economic conditions in our particular market? What is the market structure? What is the supply and demand? And what is the technology level? When they talk about the economic conditions in a particular market, there's government regulations, international dimensions, future conditions, and other macroeconomic factors. That is all in flux as we speak right now. But when we think about government regulations, some industries are heavily regulated, some are not. Pharmaceuticals obviously are heavily regulated. Some food industries are heavily regulated. Clothing, maybe not so much. Automotive, from a safety standpoint, yes. There's a lot of factors. Now, what are the macroeconomic factors? Well, this pandemic is a shock to the economic system that we're all trying to deal with. Other questions. Should our firm be in this business? What business are we in? That's a question companies should always be asking themselves. And should they or should they not be? One of my things that I started my career with Ford Motor Company and worked in the automotive industry for half of my career, and then in consumer packaged goods the second half of my industrial career. And when we think about this, I'm shocked that Ford and GM are abandoning cars. They're abandoning cars for SUVs, crossovers, and light trucks. But to give up the car business, the sedan business, the coupe business in an automotive industry just seems like a declaration of failure of some sort. Of course, the market has changed. And at what price and what output level? How much should we make? How much should we produce? And it's not a decision made in isolation. Your pricing is dependent on your competitors and what they're doing and what their market share is and what your market share is. Obviously, every company would like to gain more market share, and they would like to charge higher prices as much as possible, but they're limited by the competition and by what the marketplace is willing to bear. I mean, you could raise your prices and sell a lot less. If you sell too much less, your revenue goes down. If you sell a little bit less, your revenue may go up. Then it becomes a better decision. And we'll study why that kind of thing happens. So other questions. How can we maintain a competitive advantage if we even have one over other firms? Are we the cost leader? Are we the innovator and through product differentiation? What's our market niche? Or are we just like the dominant player? Or are we like always playing third fiddle in the marketplace? Do we produce everything ourselves? Do we outsource? Do we have alliances? Are we looking for mergers? Are we even looking to divest ourselves of parts of our business and maybe split into two the way Abbott and AbbVie did several years ago? And are we an international player? Should we be or should we not be? The other questions managers should consider. What are the risks? And what do we mean by risks? Shifts in demand and supply conditions, technological changes, the effects of competition, the changing interest rates and inflation rates. Well, talk about risks. I think we're in a world of high flux right now, and the risks are everywhere. I would think food businesses and the supply chain seems to be working well. If I would imagine more people will be buying online if they possibly can, so we should have a leap in online purchases. Before Christmas time of this past year, 2019, online sales in the United States were about 9.9%, 10%. They grew 3 percentage points to 13% during Christmas. And I would imagine this thing right here should take it even higher. But what will people be buying? They'll be buying food. Will they be buying clothes? Will they be buying luxury goods? I think people will only be spending on necessities right now. And then there's a large segment of the population that finds themselves not working at all and maybe not getting paid and having to go on public assistance, which I think the government is working hard to try to provide. So this is a crazy time. It's a kind of an amazing time to take this class, and maybe we should gear our papers and our discussions to this laboratory that's unfolding in front of us as we speak. So risk is the chance that actual future outcomes will differ than those expected. Gee whiz. Again, I keep saying gee whiz. That's happening right now in spades. The economics of business refers to the key factors That affects a firm's abilities to earn an acceptable rate of return on its investment. Excuse me. The most important of these factors are competition, technology, and customers. The competition is trying to take your market share. They're trying to steal your customers. They're trying to make more money themselves, and they're doing it through innovation if they possibly can, or just lower prices or whatever the case may be. And technology plays a role in this. Are you the one to adapt to new technology first and gain a competitive advantage, or are your competitors able to do it? And let's not forget the customers. Customers are a fickle bunch. They move sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. There seems to be a movement in this country from carbonated beverages to non-carbonated beverages. And the Pepsis and Cokes of the world have had to adapt to that very quickly. I think they've both done so very well. If we were teaching this class in Magnuson, I would have said when I first started teaching this class in 2014, and if you went out to the vending machine, you would have found a lot of Pepsi and Coke and Diet Pepsi and Diet Coke carbonated products there. If you go to the same vending machines in Magnuson now, on the first floor, you'll find that there's mostly teas and waters and Gatorades. And there are still, you can buy Pepsi or Diet Pepsi, a Coke or a Diet Coke, but I think there's only one offering of such. So it just shows you how the college age consumer has shifted. Cable TV. People are cutting the cable and streaming and just maybe directly with a content provider like Netflix. If you look at Apple TV or Amazon Prime, you don't even need cable. You could just have Amazon Prime and see local channels and see sports, if you could actually see sports now. So there's a changing marketplace, and the customers are following the technology and the shift. What used to be service providers for cable companies are now competition. So let's look at the four-stage model. I guess stage one is the good old days. You have market dominance, high profit margin, cost plus pricing. Wouldn't that be nice? You just, what are my costs, and let's add a price. A lot of this in the United States was after World War II, because there was not much competition. And I'm going to refer to my roots and go to the auto industry here. In the 1950s, the good old days, General Motors had like 80% of the domestic auto market. And they definitely had a cost plus. They had a high profit margin, and they used cost plus pricing. They were the only ones really making cars here. Ford had 20%, Chrysler was single digits. Ford was 15, 16%, and Chrysler was probably in single digits, 4 or 5%, and that was it. Changes in technology, competition, forced the firm to go to stage two. In the 60s, they dribbled in, but became a force in the 70s when the Japanese automakers, primarily Toyota, Nissan, and which was called Datsun at the time, and Mazda came into the United States and started providing more reliable cars at a lower cost. That's crazy. But that's what happened. So it became cost management, downsizing, restructuring, and it was hard for GM to adapt to that. It was so hard for GM to adapt to that if you look at General Motors today, their market share is probably 18, 19% of the domestic market for automobiles. Right, talk about a colossal toppling from the 80% market share. So they've had to manage their costs in a different way. They've had to downsize. They've had to restructure. I would add they also had to adapt a new customer focus, which is probably in stage two. So I'm guessing that's the 70s and 80s. And then when you get to stage three, maybe the 90s, we're talking about people are still trying to cost cut, but you can only cost cut so far until you start eating into the bone of your supply base. And so you want to manage your revenue better, and maybe you want more exciting products and more innovative products if you could get. But stage three is a reform stage, and then stage four is a recovery. It's revenue plus. Revenue grows profitably, and you're managing it in a different way. That's the way these authors look at it. I'm not sure these four stages are universal. And the examples they use are, well, we pay a price for having an old book that's we're buying for $5, $6, $7 because it's using companies like Avon as an example. It's a well-established company in stage one until the late 70s, found itself in stage two during the 80s, and since the mid-90s entered stage three, expanded into emerging markets and updated its image. I don't think they do much in the United States right now, and most of their business may be internationally. That individual entrepreneurial salesperson model, I'm not sure how well that works anymore. Sears and Kmart, I don't even know how you can use this example. Well, first of all, you have the Walmart effect. That Sears was pushed down to, they used to be the largest retailer in the United States until Walmart emerged in, I think, late 60s. And then by the time the 80s rolled around, Walmart became the number one retailer in the United States and pushed Sears down to third. And now I can't even fathom where they are in that hierarchy. They're so far down the line. Kmart was a competitor of Sears. Here it says they had a plan to acquire Sears, but Sears actually acquired them and drove both equities into the ground. Sears is another example of a colossal failure. Walmart, an example of a colossal success. Interesting thing about Sears was the Sears was based on their catalog business, which you could order almost anything in the world from Sears. And buy it through their catalog, and they would mail it to you. They were the Amazon of the late 1800s and the first half of the 20th century. They had their catalog business and were primed, probably if they had any foresight at all, to move into an online version of it. But they ceased operations in 1993, which was the same year a fledgling company started operations, and that company was called Amazon. It's kind of like weird how that happened. Eerie almost. Another example of a colossal failure. So we've had three kind of failed businesses in a row here. They struggled to transition from chemical-based film to digital imaging. They responded by developing a strong cash flows in the new product range. Clearly, they were not successful. They went out of business because they could not make the transition. Their management was so rooted in the film business that they had no ability to transfer to digital. They used to have cameras, but their cameras became a small part of their business by the time this all happened. So if the cameras were the strong part of their business, they could have probably made the transition like Nikon and Canon did. But that wasn't the case. So let's talk about a review of some economic terms. Microeconomics. It's the study of individual consumers and producers in specific markets. So it's individual households and individuals, and the producers, which are the firms in specific markets. And the producers produce products and services. And we're looking at the supply and demand, relationship of consumers and producers, the pricing of their output, the production process, which to a certain degree we'll look at that, the cost structure, and the distribution of income. Macroeconomics is a study of the aggregate economy, especially national output in terms of GDP, gross domestic product, or gross national product, some people call it. There are two different things actually. Employment and unemployment, inflation, you're tracking that, fiscal and monetary policies, and trade and finance between nations. So macro, if you think of the trade and finance between nations versus the trade and finance between households and firms in microeconomics. The resources that we look at for a firm are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land is the land on which you build your brick and mortar factories, or the land on which you build your server farm if you're in e-commerce, and your buildings. And you have labor involved, the people in your enterprise. What do they do? Capital, and capital is basically your investment in machinery and technology, be it IT or production machinery or material handling equipment, whatever the case may be. And there's a trade-off, labor for capital. The ancient Egyptians weren't very technically advanced. They did not have a lot of machinery to build the pyramids. What they had was a lot of labor, a lot of cheap labor, and good design and good management skills. Of course, they were managing slaves, but that's a different issue. Entrepreneurship is the willingness of someone to take a risk. Jeff Bezos took a risk in starting Amazon. He had the entrepreneurial vision, but also was willing to take the risk to create that kind of company. It'll be interesting to see what Amazon becomes after he leaves. Also, Steve Jobs took the entrepreneurial risk in starting Apple. And some would argue that since he left, they're still ridiculously profitable, but the innovation engine has died there. The two things we talk about is scarcity. It's an opportunity cost, but scarcity is the condition in which everybody wants everything. I want everything. I want a Lamborghini. I can't afford a Lamborghini. I want $30,000 watch. I can't afford a $30,000 watch. I want this, I want that. You want this, you want that. We can't have everything we want. So because we have a scarcity of resources, usually the way people are able to acquire other things is by either selling their labor or selling products and services that they make themselves. And in the world of trade, your labor is valued at a certain level of the financial level, or your products and services are. And that provides you with income that you can then use to buy other products and services. So the more money you have, the more you can buy. But if not, you're always making trade-offs. The example I always use here, and people make trade-offs all the time. I was 18 once. My cousin was 18. I wanted a sports car and wanted to go to school. I wanted to go to school more than I wanted a sports car, so I went to school. That was my trade-off. I couldn't have both. He wanted a sports car. He had no interest in going to university, so he took a job at a General Motors factory in Detroit and bought a Corvette, and was driving a Corvette all the time I was going through school. We both had what we want, but we couldn't have everything that we wanted. I was driving a much more modest car than him, even though I enjoyed getting a ride in his black on black Corvette. But this is the choices we make in when there's scarcity involved. And that's what drives economics. How do we make these choices? How do we make the trade-offs? What do we do? And then the opportunity cost is the amount. They talk about a subjective value that must be sacrificed in choosing one activity over the best. So my opportunity cost of a Corvette was probably half my college education cost. Um, that's what I traded off. If I wanted if those are the only two things in the world that I really wanted and everything else was um, satisfied, I could look at what the trade-off of one or the other would be. Couldn't do both. I didn't have the funds to do both. I didn't have the resources to do both. But I think if my college education, and I know this is shocking, a Corvette cost about $4,000 back then, and college education, the way I did it living at home and going to a state school, University of Michigan, it probably cost $8,000. So half an education for a car, that was my trade-off. That was the opportunity cost. Supply, demand, and scarcity. So the resources are land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and management skills. And then that's the supply. The demand is the needs and wants of the consuming public. Now, if your consuming public could be other companies, or it could be actually individuals or households. It really depends on what business you're in. So what are the allocations decisions? What should be produced? How should it be produced? And for whom should it be produced? So what you should be produced, that's the product offering you have. It's new product development, all of those kinds of things. Economic decisions of the firm. What? Begin or stop providing goods or services. Maybe you want to produce some things like General Motors and Ford last year decided to stop building and providing sedans. I think they only have like one or two in each of their companies, and begin producing SUVs in more mass. And I think they even have the intent, even though I haven't seen their electric cars really. I think General Motors has the Bolt, maybe. I don't know if Ford has a full electric yet, but begin producing hybrid and electric vehicles. How do they do it? They have to have the hiring, staffing, capital budgeting. They have to put the capital budgeting into the new product development and the machinery required to make new kinds of products. And for whom do they do it? Who's the target customers most likely to purchase what they want? So it's production, resourcing, which is finance and accounting, and then who you're doing it for it's the marketing and sales function of the company. So at the country level, you have a market process, a command process, and a traditional process. The use of supply and demand in the market and material incentives to answer the questions of what, how, and for whom. The command process, the government does it. That's basically a state-controlled, which I think right now the extremes of that are Cuba and Venezuela. China has probably moved towards a market process more than they're in a command process. And the traditional process is use of customs and traditions to answer the three basic questions. So in a market process, there's some government involvement, is one way of looking at it, and create some rules of fair play. I mean, one of the things economists always talk about is how involved government should be. Well, I think the government should be involved in the creation of traffic laws and stoplights. I find them very useful rather than people just driving in chaos and doing whatever they want to do, because they create these laws to stop accidents from occurring. They have laws to protect consumers. They have laws to prevent companies from becoming too big and too monopolistic and driving the markets in a way that they only want to drive it. The command process is complete opposite. Government is in control of everything. The Soviet Union was the poster child for that. The remaining ones are North Korea, China, and Venezuela, none of them which are doing economically well. China used to have the command process, but Deng Xiaoping moved it to more of a market process. It's kind of a hybrid right now. The traditional process is what they call laissez-faire, no government involved. It's if you're a hunter and really good at hunting game, and I'm really good at making arrows, but a horrible hunter, and you're a great hunter, but a horrible maker of arrows. Maybe we come to some sort of agreement, some custom, some tradition that says, hey, listen, you make me the arrows, and I'll be able to hunt for both of us. Hey, good deal, sounds fair. And maybe, a third party is like, yeah, you guys are good at making arrows, you guys are good at hunting, you're both horrible at skinning and tanning the hides and preparing the meat. I'll do that. And then you have no government involvement, but by bartering and trade-offs and people specializing and using their skills, that's a traditional process. So there's three basic economic questions. This is a summary of what we talked about. What goods and services should we produce? So from the standpoint of the company, that's the product decision. How should these goods and services be produced? It's hiring, staffing, procurement, capital budgeting. Do we insource? Do we outsource? All those questions. For whom are we doing it? What's the market segmentation decision? What is the customer? And I'll rely on my quality background. Who is the customer? What do they really want? And what can you provide? Entrepreneurship is a willingness to take certain risks. Most people like to work someplace and be told basically what to do. The entrepreneur likes to strive and create and try different things, and failure, they have less of a fear of failure than the rest of us who just want to go and kind of more or less be told by an entrepreneur what to do. And I've simplified it greatly. Management is the ability then to organize resources and administer tasks to achieve these goals. The entrepreneur could be great at the founding of the company, but may not be a good manager. They're two different skills. And as the company grows, an example is Chobani, the Greek-style yogurt company. It was founded by a Kurdish fellow, and he came to the United States and bought an old yogurt factory from, I think, Dannon in upstate New York, and started making a more robust yogurt, less water content, which is what Greek-style yogurt is, and not so many additives. I remember someone that worked at General Mills in the yogurt business once told me that they told their boss, when do we at what point of adulterating this yogurt product will we reach the point where we can't actually call it yogurt anymore? So in that Yoplait world of creamy, chemical kind of yogurt-like product with all kinds of additives and fruits and weird flavors, he came back to the basics and created basic flavors that people would know, like strawberry and blueberry, but a thick, hearty, healthy yogurt the way it's supposed to be with natural cultures. And the business grew dramatically. But it grew beyond his ability to manage the daily operations because he had this great idea and he was able to make it happen. He took the entrepreneurial risk, but then he couldn't run the place himself. So they were on the verge of going out of business. He had to hire a professional to do that. And he still kept, obviously, the entrepreneurial side of it. And the company is successful because he was able to realize, I'm a great entrepreneur, I'm a bad manager, let's get someone that knows what they're doing. So, a global application, if we talk about Western Union, which is on pages 19 and 20 of the book. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at this company, I don't even know, I think they still exist. I'm not quite sure what they do. I think they wire money to each other. But Western Union in 1851, predecessor company, the New York and Mississippi Valley Printing Telegraph Company, is formed by a group of businessmen in Rochester, New York, which is also where Kodak was founded. In 1856, the company changes its name to Western Union Telegraph Company, signifying the acquisition of various competing firms. In 1871, they did a money transfer service, which soon became the company's primary business. Because how would you, before Venmo, there was Western Union, I guess. And if you read that on 1920, you can see how the company began over 100 years ago, had huge changes in technology, and to survive. In 2001, they celebrated their 150th anniversary as a network of more than 100,000 agents, locations around the world. Impressive. VNU is a Dutch publishing company. They transformed themselves into a global provider of marketing and media information. I'm unaware of this company myself. So in-class discussion. You could review the terms on page 22 and make sure you know them. They're all there. And then there's a global foods case. And the overviews on pages 1 and 2. You might want to take a look at that, because I think that this global foods case is something that goes on through the entire book, chapter by chapter. So they start off talking about, on page 1, what the situation is. And so you can read that. It's a short couple paragraphs. And then on pages 20 and 21, you can look at the solution for what they did. So the homework questions are on page 22 and 23. And I assigned problems 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7. I don't think there's any mathematics in this one. Hopefully that will start in the next chapter or 2. Thank you for your attention, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in chapter 2.